Discovering a series or franchise as a youth always made for a special event. Uncovering the lore and backstory behind a hero's journey left a lasting imprint on us. So when we learned that these iconic characters may get a follow-up sequel, you wanted the scoop, and more often than less, you had to go to the source to find answers. Naturally, as a kid, it wasn't always easy to gain access to information leading up to them. I fondly remember playing the Dragon Warrior series on the NES, and over time, found it puzzling that the series went on hiatus, especially after seeing the Final Fantasy franchise thriving on the Super NES. As time passed, however, I would get my answers buried within the import sections of my favorite subscription services. Here I would discover Dragon Quest V and VI, yet remain conflicted to the idea that these titles remained unavailable stateside, now with a new moniker attached to them. Hell, Japan would even get a remake of the first 3 installments on the Super Famicom, and those were a commercial success stateside. With a small Google search today, it's easy to discover the rationale which led to these unforeseen events, yet at a time, exploring these magazines more in depth invited me into a world I was quite unaware existed. Sales and distribution is always a factor when it comes to localizing many of our favorite franchises. In fact, some companies had a pretty difficult time breaking into the North American market, especially when Granddaddy Nintendo had already solidified their dominance at the top of the food chain. The Turbo Grafx was no exception, and much like Sega and the Master System, it wasn't going to be easy to gain market share with a selective fan base. Looking back now, Sega kinda had justification for those edgy advertisement campaigns. With that said, we fast forward to today's review, and the connection to Rondo of Blood was very apparent. Funny enough, this would be the 10th installment of our beloved series up until this point. That is, if you were curious to why the X was in the title. It sure doesn't feel that way, as Rondo of Blood originally saw an exclusive release to Japan on the PC Engine in October of '93. Now, the only thing odd about this choice to me is that the Turbo Grafx here stateside received the CD-based add-on. Yeah, the original Street Fighter was home to it. Remember how great that was? Imagine getting Street Fighter 1 on your Turbo Duo while your homeboy got Street Fighter 2 on the Super NES. Perhaps the low sales numbers made Konami second guess a release outside of Japan. In fact, we wouldn't see a re-release for Rondo of Blood until we were blessed with the Wii Virtual Console back in 2010. Nevertheless, this title still eluded many of us diehards for years, and fast forward to today, and it's time to crack this case open once again for a historical revisit. Rondo of Blood would be Konami's first crack at a CD-based Castlevania experience. Disc-based capabilities would allow for many new features, including a CD-quality soundtrack and animated cutscenes. The opening act alone places the power on display, with beautifully hand-drawn visuals that would be stretched out across the entire adventure. The music. Where do I even begin? The use of Red Book audio alongside an onboard sound chip is a recipe for a far superior experience. Pair that with a brilliant cast of composers and you're handed a wonderful mix of diverse sound. It's sort of this sweet blend of pop rock meets synthwave, incorporating in a wide range of classical instruments. Electric guitars and drum solos can be heard throughout various tracks, and the vintage Konami rearrangements are some of the best I've come across. Our story opens in the year 1792, where we are greeted to the newest addition to the Belmont lineage, Richter Belmont, descendant of Juice Belmont, and the OG himself, Simon Belmont. Now that's a guy you want to take life lessons from. Now heir to the legendary vampire killer, he suits up for a surprise trip to Castle Dracula. Apparently, Dracula's discovered a new anti-aging serum to maintain eternal youth, by means of kidnapping the town's locals, including Richter's girlfriend Annette, who has now been abducted by the Dark Priest Shaft in efforts to lure poor Richter to the castle. He's sort of this time period's version of the Dark Witch Drolta from Bloodlines, responsible for the resurrection of the Count. Now suited up with horse and buggy to confront the Lord of Darkness and save the many maidens hidden inside Drax Keep. Richter is a man of the land. In fact, he takes his training quite seriously, honing in on his craft to construct a few new moves. It's the little quality of life improvements that make using Richter in combat so satisfying. For starters, Richter doesn't require upgrades or modifications to the vampire killer. He's an all-in-one package, dealing those crafty whip strikes with finesse, along with a vintage assortment of sub-weapons. Additionally, if I pick up a specific sub-weapon along my travels, my previously equipped sub-weapon will remain nearby in the event I decide to further change course, or manage to equip one by mistake. He's also quite the scholar, carrying around a few biblical passages in efforts to preach to the choir. beating some knowledge into the many creatures of the night. Richter also has a sweet backflip that becomes extremely convenient when you least expect it. The item crash also makes a return, sorta similar to that of Bloodlines, while momentarily granting you invincibility to do some additional damage to enemies. Trust me, save this for boss encounters, it will make them a complete breeze. Now, let's look at our supporting cast, the many fair maidens in distress. To begin, there's Annette, whom we previously mentioned to be Richter's love interest, potentially waiting inside Dracula's tower for her mans to come scoop her up. There's Iris, who's the daughter of the village doctor, along with Tara, a village nun, who comedically mistakes Richter with a vision from God upon her rescue. Finally, we have Richter's apparent distant relative, Maria Renard, now orphaned after the shocking murder of her parents. Maria is persistent and will aid Richter along his travels, seeking justification for her family. Thankfully she does, because she is overpowered to all hell. She definitely bears the power of the Belmont bloodline, as her magical capabilities allow her to communicate on a Dr. Dolittle level with the local wildlife. She can summon magical doves to attack on command or shield herself in combat through protection of her reptilian companions. This partner system additionally allows her to call for help through means of sub-weapons. She's quick and nimble on her feet and is also capable of a double jump that will break the more difficult sections of the game. Maria will deal significantly more damage due to the sheer nature of her attacks. The trade-off, however, is that she's a real glass cannon, so don't get too comfortable in tight situations. She also has a pretty badass special maneuver, the Guardian Knuckle, bringing forth a ghoulish figure that can wallop opponents. She has some hilarious exchanges with the many characters you traverse with throughout, so she's well worth a playthrough. Rondo of Blood builds on the many ideas of old while providing a brand new outlook on exploration. In a way, it's a fusion of the branching pathways from Dracula's Curse, combined with the alternate routes of stage travel in Bloodlines. Instead of deciding on a path at the crossroads, now there's two ways to proceed forward with alternate exits and varied paths to your endgame. It's like those choose-your-own-adventure books you would read as a kid. You still manage to find your way to Dracula, yet the measures to get there will drastically change depending on your choices. Finding these alternate exits can be easier said than done. You may need to activate a chain of events by interacting with the many set pieces throughout. They vary in challenge, yet by doing so rewards you by new means of travel and locating the maidens to reveal the story's full ending. In the event you clear a stage, you have the option to go back via the stage select and replay them at any time, allowing you to search out the alternate exits and uncover any secrets you missed. There's also a few features that's worth pointing out, called the Technique section, which has unlockable videos that teaches you the many tricks of the trade to beat the big bads of Rondo. I know, I'm busted, I'm not gonna lie. I checked a few of these out, okay? Whatever, let's move on. Speaking of unlockables, there's also a hidden minigame that was initially implemented in the event you were missing the required Super System card for your original console. A fun little Easter egg no less that is well worth checking out. This is the shit I live for, guys. Rondo of Blood does a great job capturing the small details throughout. It's storytelling at its finest. Act 1 opens on a stagecoach, headed to the town of Veros. Along the way, Death stops in for a quick back and forth scuffle, attempting to end things prematurely before they can even take off. However, Richter drops some knowledge on the dead man, packing those brittle bones back to old Drac as a warning of what's to come. A century in the making, hand-delivered ass-whooping. Richter's first stop is a familiar one, as it quickly becomes apparent it's a terrible night for a curse. Stepping foot back into familiar territory, you soon discover the town is under attack, quickly going up in flames. As that banger of a track sets in, you quickly get your feet underneath you. As it's made apparent from the start, these audio and visuals are indeed how you do Castlevania. You hear the sounds of glass shattering throughout the city as night creatures lock in on you as prey, and it becomes oh so satisfying to chip away at them with pinpoint accuracy. Enemies now move with a high degree of fluidity, and by the time you reach the courtyard, the enemies have already grown substantially in stature. You begin to methodically pick apart the stone guards while the city burns around you, and the atmosphere soon amplifies. Keep in mind exploring the grounds will be your ultimate reward, as your first hidden exit is indeed close by, and it's cleverly masked, so when in doubt, always whip it out. Your first boss encounter is a spectacle. A giant wyvern descends down from the shadows. This is the suggested path, and it's a great place easing into the boss encounters. As you hammer away with your sub-weapons, you quickly learn that as their health meters reach 0, they will deliver a final attack as a last-ditch effort to put you away. So you need to constantly stay on your toes and be mindful of this. Oh, and fun fact, if you manage to pull off a flawless victory here, you receive a special bonus, netting you an extra life. Clearly, I don't have the cred here to obtain one, but you know, just throwing it out there. Now, let's circle back real fast. In the event you took the aforementioned path earlier, the path reveals passage to a network of underground tunnel systems that powers the city's water supply. As you continue forward, you eventually find a path outside the city leading to a bridge which leads to a run-in with a killer serpent. This is what I consider the advanced path, as this fight can easily get the best of you if not cautious to the enemy's movement. He slithers about the bridge, easily leaving you vulnerable to attacks, as your placement is integral to land a good strike. Stay in sync with his movement and use an item crash if need be, and in due time you will see your way to victory. This is essentially how your adventure will go from here on out, so you must understand how navigating the lands works. If you continue to stay on the tried and true path, you will eventually make your way to the castle courtyard, dodging crows and picking off the hired help until you reach the drawbridge, which now lowers to welcome you back to Castle Dracula. The inmates have indeed been expecting you. Each act has a tremendous degree of polish, capturing each theme, perfectly designed props and placement that sets the pace. It's how you react in these situations that will change the experience as you manage to discover hidden keys that lead you to the many townsfolk. Discovering Maria will unlock her as a playable character. From here on out, you can really take advantage of her skill set. However, in the event you trip and fall during the chase down, you can explore the underground catacombs that leads you to another scenario. Again, Richter's fate is left up to you, and that outcome really depends on the greater of the two evils. You can choose to fight the werewolf, who will undoubtedly be a pain in the ass your first few scuffles. Me personally, I always have a great time with this fight, and I come into it with a variety of sub-weapons to find the best outcome. Plus, it's just fun attempting to keep up with his movements as he gets the feline zoomies early on, bouncing all over the castle walls. However, you can also partake in a battle with a bone golem who will bring an endurance round throughout. It's a pretty wicked encounter as he will continue to rely on the souls of the castle to continually shapeshift. By the end, you will be whipping him across the room or take him for a ride just to give him some shit. The alternate route will continue throughout the bridge, further protected by gargoyles that come to life to battle you across the withering marble structures. If you lose your footing at just the right time, it creates an opportunity to stumble upon the ferryman that will take you to a premium destination. However, be warned, as an ambush is in process, as mermen have been sent out in groves to prey on our youthful young Belmont. The chapel is one of the more elegant stages of Rondo of Blood. The backgrounds alone are beautifully constructed, decked out in granite sculpts of the Greek influence. Each area is brilliantly carved out, as with the chapel that's layered in candles spread throughout the foreground and background, all while ghostly fiends pop up for a quick haunt, and the hired help will attempt to drag you below. The transitions are seamless, and you have it out with the skeletal remains of a massive night creature, now summoned for a face-off. Be sure to give the church bell a good ring overhead to find some additional health pickups. This cemetery is a frightful sight, covered in tiny clues and riddles that will put you in your Simon's Quest feels. You might search the graveyard and find a secret path under a tombstone, or discover a breakaway wall that leads you under a giant T-Rex fossil. There's a ton of unique stage pieces that has me grinning from ear to ear, like the tiny ghostly hands that drag you down to the underworld, or the giant floating head that haunts the graveyard. You trek past mudmen, and even battle some of the best Raiden impersonators just looking to scrap in the backyard, like that angry uncle at a backyard barbecue. If you're ready, take the leap to the inner halls of Castle Dracula. This is by far one of the more brutal offerings. The judge, jury, and executioner waits, and you're constantly on trial, avoiding death traps spread about to bury you 6 feet under the castle cellars. Each room is laced with pins and needles to pick you off at each crossroad. There's a lot of well-placed enemies, as each encounter will be an endurance round, maintaining your health and staying in rhythm with the many axe knights that wait. Finding the alternate route here is pretty frustrating. Just reaching the location alone is taxing, as switches are buried in the floorboards that, if activated, drops fleamen into the battlefield, and these jackasses will even hitch a ride across death devices located throughout. You can also embark on a Transylvanian excursion, trekking across the lands till you find yourself knee-deep in the muddy marshes, covered in lake frogs and tadpoles that become your tiny shadows with each step taken. This stage is littered with secrets, and you'll need to move quickly or you're gonna get picked off by the ravens. The stage houses another maiden buried within the marsh. The clues are clever in delivery, requiring you to trigger key switches in order to activate the bridge for transit below. The platforming gets hella tricky too, pivoting just right to avoid the merman. You can also just leave her high and dry and opt in for a downhill race across the Whitewater Rapids. I'm sure you guys know by now how much I love any and all pirate-themed locations. I'm constantly talking about it in my Castlevania 3 review. Well, this one doesn't disappoint. Only to proceed, you need to find a way on board, and getting across the docks is easier said than done. There's a great deal of sights to witness here, from the enchanted swordplay in the bowels of the ship to the mysterious paintings that begin to slowly haunt the halls. Making your way to the deck, you'll be swarmed by harpies and fleamen, and there's some tanky to all hell armored guards that will unapologetically beat that ass if you don't approach them accordingly. The fight with death is so well done, now living life on the water, leading the charge on his renegade runner. I tend to keep myself mounted to the middle of the sails, spamming the cross to keep him at bay, just long enough to eventually rock him. Oh, and by the way, there's an alternate stage 5 you can discover after finishing the endgame scenario, which is rewarded to you hardcore fans that go for that 100% playthrough. Before you take that leap to Dracula, the Dark Priest Shaft takes matters into his own hands. You will go through a gauntlet to reach him, as this is merely a boss rush round, and you'll run into a few familiar faces that haunt your past. Shaft will summon the 4 big bads from Castlevania 1, bringing this journey full circle. Your rematch with the Killer Bat, now packing in a few pounds since our previous go-around. The Medusa, who's ever so lovely as before, but far more cunning and capable of catching you off guard with a few new techniques. The Mummy, which in my opinion is the make or break point to get through this mess, as his raps now continue to chase you throughout and you need to manage to pivot around his projectiles to land a strike. Old Frankie Boy is also here, bringing back that vintage moveset for another dance-off. He's also got a little of that Herman Munster appeal to him, along with that crossover shuffle. If you manage to get past the core 4, you will face Shaft, who isn't too painfully difficult as long as you manage to keep a close eye on the orbs that hover throughout. Anticipate his moves, then whip accordingly. Oh, and if he gets the best of you, don't worry. You have a checkpoint at Shaft, so facing him with full health is going to be a cakewalk. Your final stretch is the dreaded but ever so endearing Clock Tower stage. You're open the stage with a now iconic bridge sprint to the tower as it crumbles away with a familiar presence following closely behind. These bats do not play, some are even straight packing heavy arms as well. You need to take your time to search out the key in efforts to locate a net. If you can get the key, there's only a lonely hawk guarding it. Soon after, you'll make your way through a small chamber, filled with the essentials, winding gears and miscellaneous stairways. There's a great deal of armored guards here, so just keep your distance and hack away until you reach the pendulums above. The final battle before Dracula will absolutely condition you for the finale. This is by far the hardest fight, and it's mainly due to the size and movement patterns of Shaft's possessions. You need to time your jumps perfectly to clear them, and if not, they're dealing significant damage. It's going to be difficult to process everything while Shaft floats about, talking his shit, but just keep at it. So, we arrive to the final act. A road we've been down, only this time it never looked so good, as it's revered today as one of the most iconic moments in the entire series. The fight opens as any good Vlad fight would, only the animation and detail and execution is second to none. Remember when I said that backflip would come in handy? Well, here is Drax's Achilles heel, as you ever so gracefully soar over the peak of his attack. As you continue to exploit this weakness, you duck and pivot across any and all additions to his arsenal till he eventually reveals his true power. The Beast of Nightmares, a version of Dracula menacing in presentation that's chiseled to the bone. As you go toe-to-toe with the Beast, you merely must stay in sync with his timely jumps, with the occasional projectile coming in his final breaths. As the count is bested once more, we cut away to Richter and Dracula as they partake in a heated exchange. Just then, the Lord of Darkness quickly bursts into a ball of flames, releasing his spirit into the ether as he flees the castle walls to see another day. Funny enough, however, is the castle doesn't crumble down in the aftermath, something we have grown accustomed to over the years, perhaps a bit of foreshadowing, as there appears to be more to the story than meets the eye. Nevertheless, Richter makes haste, proceeding to ride off into the sunset on his stagecoach, reminiscing of the many memories made inside the castle walls. However, in a surprising twist, Maria's ending finds her too escaping the castle alongside her many sidekicks as the castle indeed crumbles behind her. As her story closes out, you are greeted to a Maria walk-off moment, paying homage to the many moments with friends along her travels. Rondo of Blood does a fantastic job incorporating in the core fundamentals of old while allowing players to pave their own path. Although each stage offering opens with a clear-cut objective, it slowly branches off, deviating away from the beaten path to allow for endless discovery. The choices are yours and yours alone, as discovering allies and hidden clues further fleshes out your story. Rondo of Blood made quite the cultural impact on the series moving forward, bridging the gap between the classic experience and the post-Metroidvania era the series would soon evolve into. The rich and vibrant design choices influenced a direct sequel, with a vast majority of these sprite designs getting repurposed throughout the years, spread across many entries to come. Rondo of Blood doesn't look to reinvent the wheel. It more so takes the tried and true formula and perfects it. Where the classic entries more often than less becomes confined to those stiff and gritty controls, Richter bears far greater fluidity and mobility in control. This is complemented through the use of new techniques and quality of life upgrades that do oh so subtly without deviation. In other words, the game never cheats you, but doesn't hold your hand either, teaching you along your journey. You may get into a pinch and realize what you really need is the right sub-weapon to power through. This is done through trial and error, slowly adjusting to these nuances, thus establishing a perfect learning curve. In the event, you run into a painstakingly difficult enemy encounter. With practice, you begin to see the chinks in their armor, as they will soon enough telegraph their many movesets to allow you to pick up on their actions, which will inevitably increase your reaction time. The stages were the true highlight, filled with a perfect amount of lore wrapped up in them. Some a bit more cryptic than others, yet in time, you will slowly uncover the mysteries behind them, rewarding you for these efforts. You know, speaking of all this cryptic stuff, there still may be a few clues out there that explains why we never received this adventure stateside. In fact, the clue we need just might be considered the most controversial reveal of the entire franchise, as many tend to disregard it altogether. Well, we definitely don't do that around here. Don't worry, Symphony fans, our paths are destined to cross soon enough. However, before we get there, we need to take a small detour back to the Super NES to make sure we uncovered all the mysteries behind this current Castlevania story, as no stone shall be left unturned. When we return, we will look at the infamous Castlevania Dracula X. See you there, gang.